Alright, so here's a quick video on polarities, or rather polarity maps that are an awesome tool to understand and analyze polarities. So polarities are interdependent pairs that need each other over time. I've got that description, or that definition, and the concept of a polarity map from the book And, if you want to know more about that. So there, Barry Johnson defines a distinction between polarity and a problem. So again, where polarity has seemingly opposing things that need each other over time, a problem is something that you can solve and it has one clear right answer. So a problem would be 2 plus 3, which is 5, and it's certainly not 6. It's very clear that 5 is the one right answer. It's either or, one or the other. Whereas with a polarity, an example is if you want to train, you need activity and rest. You can't just do one or the other. Neither will get you to the desired result. You need both and. A polarity is also known as a tension or a dilemma or a paradox. And that's where I want to throw in one of my favorite quotes that is attributed to Niels Bohr, where he says, "How wonderful that we have met with a paradox. Now we have some hope of making progress." And that points exactly to the power of a paradox or a polarity, that there's seemingly opposing things that seem like they're contradicting each other, but you actually need both, and so you need to find a bigger lens, a wider understanding, and that's exactly where polarity helps you to find that bigger perspective where everything makes sense again. So how do you use a polarity like that? That is where this thing comes in, and that's a depiction of a polarity map. And so on a polarity map, you put on one side one of the things that seem necessary to reach a goal. So let's say our goal is to run. Let's make this a bit bigger. Run a marathon, and obviously you need activity for that. So that's the thing over here. So, and then the way you run through a polarity map is that let's also put in the thing on the other side that we already assume we need, that is rest. So the way you run through a polarity map is in a figure of 8. So let's start on the top left. So you first list, well, what's positive about activity? And here would be, well, that increases endurance. So if I go running, I increase my endurance. And then you move on in the figure of 8, you go down here, and you list, well, what happens when you overemphasize activity at the expense of rest? Well, what then happens is I get muscle injury because they can't regenerate. And then, so from here you move on to the top right, and this is where you again state, well, what's positive about rest? And that's exactly that thing. Your muscles can regenerate, and your muscle can actually build. And then again, from here, you move down and you look at, well, what happens if I overemphasize rest at the expense of activity, well, then I just turn into a couch potato and my muscles actually degenerate or degrade. And so now we completed the figure of 8, and the reason why you move through that is it's a natural thing to talk about, well, what's positive, and then what happens if I overemphasize this, and then what's positive on the other side, and what's negative if I overemphasize that. And knowing that you move through these 4 quadrants allows everyone to take the other perspective. So especially if you have a conflict around, well, what's better, activity or rest, it helps people to loosen up on their positions because they know they get to their positive side and they can describe their perspective. So if the 2 things here on the bottom is where you're at, then you will end up at, well, not being able to run a marathon. But if you manage to do the things on the top, you'll be able to run a marathon. And one more thing I want to tell you about the polarity map is, so the first step is seeing that there's a polarity, and then you map it out. And then another thing that's suggested in the book is that you list next to it the things you want to do, so your action steps, and you do that so you do that here, and you also do that over here. And then for the things on the bottom, you want to list early warning signs. So how do I realize quickly that I'm in the muscle degrading part? Well, I'm spending too much time on the couch, or I'm gaining fat, or whatever it is. All right, so hopefully that example is very clear, and then I want to also give you an example that is closer to our topic in organizational design, and that is often an argument against or about autonomy versus integration. Which one's better? And again, it's not either or, it's both and. So if we start again on the top left, so what's the positive thing about integration? Well, you can get to low costs. You get clarity around standards, or you get clarity through standards. Everything's very clear because this is the one way that we do it. And you can leverage best practices. And what happens if you overemphasize this is that what we see in the bottom left, you end up in a bureaucracy, you end up with turf wars, and you end up with micromanagement. And that's a lot of what we associate with old work and the bad side. And so what comes in is a lot of this new work talk and about self-organization and agile and so forth. That's what we have on the top right. So what do you get from introducing autonomy? That is adapting to changing needs, entrepreneurial initiative, and innovation. But also, clearly, autonomy also has a downside. So if I overemphasize autonomy at the expense of integration, I get islands of knowledge, I get redundant systems, and I get local optimization without seeing the bigger picture. So again, here it's not an either or, it's a both and. So it's not about being centralized and focusing on integration versus decentralization and autonomy. It's about doing both at the right amount. All right, I hope that helps with understanding polarity maps and how they can support you in your thinking.